Here, whatever. Good day, welcome to Great White Retro. I'm Gord Fessick, and this is my wife's cat, Star. Our topic today is this VIC-20. We're going to do an S-video modification on it. I'm going to put a port on here that is compatible with the Commodore 64. Let's get her done. Alright, let's get this started. To get at the back of this motherboard, I need to remove all of the RF shield, and that means desoldering all of these grips, all of these clamps here. And I am applying some extra flux to this desoldering braid because by itself the desoldering braid seems to be useless. I am being careful with this stuff, even if it doesn't look like it. But I did have some good success once I was using some flux on there. I tried to be really careful with this board. As I was desoldering bits, I was also wiping off the affected areas with alcohol to remove any excess or burnt flux. Last thing I want is to have this board destroy itself because of leaving flux on the board. The braid just seemed to work so much better for this particular purpose, even though it would get stuck on occasion. The RF shield would absorb a lot of heat, so I had to give my iron a break a few times. I think a new soldering iron might be in the budget for 2023. Anyway, there we go. Got all the excess flux off of there. So we keep going, getting all of the other grips off of there, and cleaning them off as I go. There was also one more tab on the back in between the user and cassette ports. So after getting the front all cleaned up, I then got to the back there, and it wasn't too bad. It just took some effort, but eventually the board did come free. I used up a lot of braid. There we go. Let's get that extra flux off of there. There's the back one. The back one by itself, the flux by itself does not remove all the solder. I still had to wedge something to lift the tab up a little bit. And there we go. And because I am using separate flux, I was working off of this plastic bag. I didn't want to wreck my desk or anything underneath it. There we go. I'm trying to lift that little tab up there. And I'm also using that to pry the tabs gently off of those grips, one at a time, just heating them up and then trying to lift them up. I did get them all loose one by one. At one point I thought I was prying a trace loose, so I backed off, and then I was able to remove the rest of these a little easier. And then the board came out without too much trouble. Let's get these screws out, and then we can see about removing the RF shield. We're keeping that side panel attached because it doesn't need to come off for what we're doing. And there we go, the board is free. Let's take a closer look at this board. The copyright on here is 1982, suggesting that this is a later revision VIC-20. The part number is up there. There's this modification that I don't recognize at all. I'm not sure what this is. Going from one of the video signal lines to the cartridge port of all things. I wasn't going to touch that though. Next step was removing the stock 5-pin DIN connector for the VIC-20 video. I need to replace this with an 8-pin DIN connector similar to one used on the Commodore 64. The whole point again is to get S-video and be able to get better picture quality out of this computer. I started using the solder puller for this. I had lots of practice from taking those keys off of the Apple IIe, but still, I had a little bit of trouble. I ended up heating the traces a little bit to get the parts out of there, to get the pins out of there one by one, and then I could use the solder puller to clean up those holes there. I don't believe I damaged any traces doing this. But yeah, I was able to get the back side loose, and then I got the front side loose, and there's the original connector. So now I've got these new connectors here. also from Console 5. It's meant for a Sega Genesis system, but I'm going to try to adapt it here. So now the question is, how do I modify this thing? I want to lift up these 3 back pins. I could just try the brute force method here. That might be enough. Let's see. Ooh, this is interesting. This bottom assembly comes off, so I should just be able to bend out these pins and then put the bottom assembly back. The only thing is, this isn't going to work for a couple reasons. First, there's no shield ground, right? So these 2 bottom pieces are missing. Second, these things are now loose. I'm going to think about this one and I'll come back. I ended up salvaging the shield connectors off of the original VIC-20 connector, and after that I was able to put this back together. I cropped the pins on the back 3 connectors, so we still have some structural support for those connectors, but they're not going to make contact with the motherboard. Still, this is okay. This will at least maintain the original strength of this connector, which might stand some insertions and removals. I'm going to install this as is to see how it looks. Alright, here goes nothing. Hey, there we go. Still got that lovely dot crawl, if you can see it there on the screen. But at least we have not wrecked the original video quality of this VIC-20. And the connector seems fairly stable as well. So with that sorted out, let's take a look at this modification. It's on the so-called denial wiki here, and what we're doing is we're replacing 2 components in the video area, and we're cutting some traces and replacing some traces. This particular modification makes use of the stock VIC-20 connector though, which I'm pretty sure doesn't have any standard except for other VIC-20s with this modification. If we scroll down a little bit, we can see the original circuit just below that. So you see what we're cutting and what we're going to be adding. The only thing is, we're not going to use the stock VIC-20 connector. We want to be able to use the same standard that a Commodore 64 uses, 64C, Commodore 128 plus 4, and all of those other ones that support the Luma and Chroma pinouts. Here are the actual pinouts here, and you can see we've got power on one of the pins. Probably that's for the RF modulator on the VIC-20. Anyway, here's how we're going to approach this. We're going to actually cut this line right here to take away the 5 volts and make that our luminance line. We're then going to replace this capacitor with a 75 ohm resistor and this ferrite bead with a 0.1 microfarad capacitor. It'll look almost seamless. The backside's going to be a little more interesting. To reduce noise, we're going to cut all of these traces here, just to keep the luminance signal clean. We're going to cut this trace over here, there it is, to cut out the chroma mix so we isolate our chroma signal. Then we're going to add 2 connections here. This will be our new luminance signal to pin 1. And then we're going to add a line here that's going to go around up to the top connector and go on to pin 8. Look away if you don't like seeing vintage computers butchered. I just use a Stanley knife to cut those traces. I scrape away at the traces and at the solder mask, and then I'll take a multimeter to make sure that I've actually successfully cut that line and I haven't cut anything else around it accidentally. Okay, that's looking good from here. Nice and clean. On the back, it's a similar story. We're going to cut the original composite video line at those 3 places I explained earlier. That way we've isolated pins 4 and 5. And we've also reduced the possibility of additional line noise here. That way we've only got the one line. It'll be our luminance line. And there we go. And then we're going to cut that one chrominance pin there to isolate the chrome signal. Oh, actually, we're not quite done yet. We're still working on the luminance signal, looks like. Okay. All right. Now let's get at that chroma pin. There we go. So now that we've cut those out, we'll make sure that there's no accidental shorts. There we go. That line is cleanly cut. I'm going to solder the connector back in there now. And then we're going to run that line. There's the connector. And we do have the original shield ground from the original VIC-20 connector there. These cable connectors seem to be pretty modular, so they can mix and match. Anyway, let's take a good look at that. Not bad. There we are. There we go. There's the brand new connector, and none of the extra pins are interfering. We're going to run our luminance line next. That's going to go from here. That's actually one of the closest points that we've got, right there. Okay, there we are. And that's actually an unused capacitor line there, so we can put that wire all the way through. A little extra solder. I don't know why I had trouble with this one. There we are. Then I exposed some of the insulation at the other end so that I could solder that to pin 1, which is our now luminance signal. I'll cut away that excess as soon as I've measured and made sure that we have a clean connection from one end of that patch to the other. And there we go. Looks good. Next step is to remove those other components. We're going to remove that cap and we're going to put a resistor in. We've just done that. There we go. We put the resistor in, we put the other cap in, placed the ferrite bead, and now we're running the line for the chrominance signal. I didn't realize it at the time, but I decided to run that line through that hole there. That's a mounting screw hole there. Oh boy. So as a result of me not taking care of that properly, there we go. And I'm soldering the new components in place there. Not bad. Get those in there, and I cut off the excess leads. And now with that line run up, let's make sure that our new connections are good and that we're not cross-connected anywhere we're not supposed to be. You don't hear it because I have the volume muted, but I'm listening for tone on my multimeter, and those connections do look good. Okay. I didn't have any extra leads except for the backs of that connector, so we'll put that there on pin 8, the center top pin, and that's our chrominance signal. So hopefully we've got this working. Let's give it a try. Here goes. Oh, look at that. Well, that's not bad. It is sharper, though. If you can tell, it's got a crosshatch in the border. This funny dot crawl is still happening, though, so I've got no idea where that's coming from. But we do have S-video, I think. I know I don't have regular video. Let's hook up a keyboard and check the other colors. So not bad, actually. The cyan is actually cyan this time, and not kind of a funny green. So not bad. The yellow looks a little different. And there's the actual green. Hopefully we can see it on camera, but we have a bit of a checkerboard pattern in the border where the cyan is. And here's a side-by-side comparison of the composite video and the S video. The cyan is noticeably different. In fact, it looks actually correct on there. So I went back to my last video and I copied this thing verbatim. The keyboard feels a lot better. But notice something. I don't know if it'll turn up on camera, but we'll see. It is working, but I'm only hearing it out of one side, and that's because the cable I got is a stereo cable for anyone who happens to have a dual SID chip on their Commodore 64. So what we're going to try to do is bridge those two on the VIC-20 so this cable will work without any modifications. Let's see what we can do. Okay, well, figured it out. I had to jumper pin 3 over to pin 7, which was on that side. Although the illustration seems to tell me it's pin 8 for some reason. But I actually get stereo sound at this point. Okay, so using 8-Bit Classics stereo cable here, we're able to get S-video and stereo sound, even if it is still just one channel. Alright, let's put this thing back together. Thank goodness that worked. First step, putting this thing back together, I'm going to use the mounting screws to the RF shield. I am not going to solder all of those grips because if I have to get into this machine again, I don't want to have to fight it too much. But we'll get the screws in there, and then we'll bend that one grip back in there, and we'll solder it into place. After doing that, I hooked the video back up just to make sure we didn't short anything out, and we've got our regular picture back. Thank goodness. Next step is mounting this thing back into the case. We've got those 3 case screws that are needed, and that was what the RF shield is for, is to put this shortboard in the original case. Now, the lack of screw in the middle would have normally been a problem, except we do have an extra mounting screw in between the user and cassette ports, so that should hold things reasonably steady. And in the back there, we do have another screw. So while we got 6 out of 7 screws, we're doing pretty good. And now that that's mounted, let's get the Made in USA label back on there. I am using double-sided tape. This is the same stuff you use to put plastic up on windows. It's the same stuff I used to put the Apple IIe's feet back on as well. And there it is. Made in USA. Not something you see every day anymore. And with that done, let's get the keyboard reattached to the top part of the case. And this, I had to be careful with the screws, making sure I used the right screws. Fortunately, there were only 3 long screws left. All the rest of these were meant for this. Easy peasy. After getting the keyboard back together, I put the case back up right side up, and I used more double-sided tape to put the top labels back on there. This time I use a Stanley knife to trim the adhesive to fit before removing the cover. Now, you might want to cut a little bit more to the inside if you pull this trick, but it seemed to work for me. I think the label was up a little higher than originally was, so that's okay. You'd have to be a bit of a nitpicker to notice this. That label came on just fine. And over to the power label, we do something very similar. And there we go. We've got that black piece for the LED, for the power LED. I got this backwards so many times. You're supposed to put the black part on first, and then the LED through the bottom up. Again, hopefully, I'll remember to do this if I ever get a Commodore 64. There we go. Put the LED and its pressure fitting back on there, and that's not going anywhere. Next, let's mate the 2 halves of this system back together. Okay, LED for the power light, there we are. This did take a little bit of effort to make sure those back tabs fit, and I wanted that keyboard connector to not be in the way, so I gave it a bit of a shove before closing the lid on this thing for, hopefully, the last time. There are the snaps back in place, and let's get those 3 screws on there. And with any luck, the next person that opens this computer will get that satisfying click. Not bad there, Commodore. Not bad at all. We miss you guys. And with everything put right back together, let's make sure we haven't lost anything. There we are. Hello, Vic. Welcome to 2022. So I'd say this particular cleanup and restoration was a big success. Not bad at all. This restoration went very well, in spite of my doubts getting the S-Video working. Look at that, we got a few colors at least. We got stereo sound, we've got a Commodore 64 style connector on there, and we are ready for some software due to arrive in the next episode. Until then, good day.